In order to take our lash mapping and styling even further, we really need to take all aspects of the eyes into consideration when planning out our lash set. One of these things is the eye crease. Is it a flattering shape for the client? If not, perhaps covering it with the eyelash extensions would be beneficial and really bring your lash set to life even more than ever before. Every single person we see will have a unique eye shape, eye crease. Everything about them is unique to them individually, which is really beautiful. So with that being said, it's important for us to use our discretion when deciding what aspects of the eye is flattering for your client and which are not. When we give all of this theory and information on what we say is ideal versus what we say is not ideal, these are just guidelines. Some people's imperfections are what make them so beautiful. So it's up to you to decide which areas of the eye we would like to enhance versus which we would like to cover with eyelash extensions. So since we're really focusing on the eye crease today, let's say there's something about the crease that your client doesn't particularly love about themselves. Sometimes the inner corner of the eye crease will sit in just a little lower than the outer corner. The shape that we consider ideal is a perfect, almost like a sunset shape. A nice, smooth line without bumps along the way. So if, for example, a client's inner corner sits lower, and we can create a lash set that would look lovely for them by using lengths or curls to just sit high enough to cover that crease, then the whole eye shape itself will really look like it flows perfectly for your client. Take a look at this diagram below. You'll notice the 3 most common eye crease shapes. So you can take a screenshot of this and use it within your practice as well. I'm going to run through a few photos that I've collected of common eye crease shapes that I've personally seen and how I've worked with them in order to really give a visual of what I'm talking about. But one thing that I like to do when planning on covering a certain section of the eye crease, I want to think about how many millimeters I need in order to bring my lash set higher than the eye crease to cover a certain area. Sometimes length is enough to cover that crease. Other times we want to bump up our curl in order to bring the lashes up and over the crease. Versus other times we can't do that. We can't use more curls because we have the brow bone to take into consideration. So there's so many things to factor when you're creating your lash set. Let's look at these photos. Okay, so first let's look at this photo in the middle. Although this person's eye crease isn't perfect all the way across the eye, not so much a sunset shape, her eye crease is, at least in my opinion, so beautiful. It's not something that I'm looking to cover up by any means. Now let's take a look at photo number 1. You can see from this point here to this point right here that the eye crease kind of sits a little bit lower on the eye. So in this area, it may be beneficial to use such a shape or length. You can always use whatever lash mapping you think suits their eye shape, but just changing up the curls or the lengths for your client. So if we're covering this area here, for this particular client, since their natural lashes are so lifted and there's not a lot of space between the lash line here and the crease, we don't have to worry too much about the lengths that we're using or a curl to really bump over that eye crease because we're naturally going to cover this anyways. Even look at her natural lashes. They're already sitting higher than the eye crease. So she's not going to be very tough to cover. Next, let's look at example number 2. Again, you can see here from about this point to right here, the eye crease isn't super ideal. Now, is it something worth covering? That's totally up to you to decide. I think it's honestly very lovely already, But if we did cover this general area, which again wouldn't be hard because the crease isn't too high, then the crease on the outer corner and the inner corner are perfect. So that's something we really want to think about as well. So you can see again on example number 1, this area looks lovely, it's smooth, that will look great, and same with the outer corner area. So we're really only planning on covering some of the eye crease. Just because someone doesn't have an ideal crease across a certain section of the eye does not mean that we have to cover the entire eye crease. We can just cover certain sections of it. So let's take a look at example number 3. So the reason why I chose this example isn't so much because there's a lot to correct with the eye crease, but it's a great example to show how important it is to assess the natural lash lift when determining your lengths and curls that you need in order to lift the lashes up enough to cover the eye crease. So, although there's not a crazy amount of space between this client's eye crease and natural lash line itself, if we wanted to cover that crease, we'd have to use more dramatic curls, something with a lift, such as D curl, L curl, CC curl, M curl, anything that's gonna lift the lashes up in order for the lashes to sit high enough to cover that crease. Why? Because the natural lashes point down, so we need something that's going to counteract that downward swoop and lifting them up. Now, on top of that, we want to take lengths into consideration as well. So usually I would say, okay, well, how many millimeters are between the lash line and the crease? That's how many millimeter lengths we have to use in order to cover that crease. Well, that's not going to work in this example. Reason being is the natural lashes tilt downward. So naturally, the lashes that sit downward have a couple millimeters difference between that lash line and where the lash itself is going to adhere to the natural lash. So we need to add a couple extra millimeters in length depending on the client that you're working on in order to counteract that natural downward tilt of the lashes. So for this client, we're gonna really focus on length and curl in order to lift those lashes higher than the crease, if that is what you're going for. So let's take a look at example number 4. Remember earlier when I talked about the brow bone sitting quite a bit lower? For this client in example number 4, yes, there is some work that needs to be done on the eye crease. If we look from pretty much this area, I would say here actually, to right about here, the eye crease is, let's say, a little less than ideal for her eye shape. It's not doing anything to enhance the beauty of the shape that she already has. But we want to take caution here because this client's brow bone does protrude further and her eyes are a little deeper set. So for this example, if we're going to use anything to cover that eye crease, we want to work with length, not curl. Because if we start putting DD curl, unless her natural lashes are pointing straight down, if we use D curl, DD curl, L curl, anything like that, then we're worrying about hitting that brow bone. And I mean, for this particular client, we don't need a lot of length. As you can see, there's not a lot of space between her natural lash line and the eye crease. But that's something to take into consideration as well. And then last but definitely not least, let's check out this eye crease here. This is something that you'll run into from time to time where the inner corner crease actually folds over the natural lash line. So for this particular client, we have to be careful and not use really short lengths or really dramatic curl, meaning like D or DD curl, like a really curly lash. Actually, L curl or something like that would work well because it comes straight out and then goes straight up instead of curling into the skin. But for this particular client, we often don't say this, but if you work with really short lengths on that inner corner, then the lashes themselves are going to hide underneath the fold of skin. So we want to steer clear of that. We want to use something that's going to sit out. Maybe you could use a B curl. A C curl might work depending on their natural lash lift. but lengths that are going to be long enough to cover that fold of skin and sit out so that we can actually see them, and so that the lash extensions do not poke the client's skin and cause issues that way. So we're gonna use longer lengths from this area to this area here, and again, steering clear of D curl, anything that's gonna curl into that skin while still covering that fold of skin. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video today. This is a lot to digest for sure, so if you have any questions at all, reach out in the comments below, show some love, and then we can bring even more videos like this your way.